Imagine a lavish night where chandeliers shine bright and whispers of the elite conceal dark secrets. Everything seemed flawless until an unexpected figure walked through the ballroom doors. Rescued from the streets by a millionaire after saving his daughter, she now faces a world far from her own. Yet her gaze challenges appearances, unveiling a disturbing truth. Choices will be made, and what's at stake goes beyond pride. It's a matter of survival.
The grand ballroom was bathed in golden light, the crystal chandeliers shimmering like stars against the high ceilings. Soft classical music filled the air as Manhattan's elite mingled, their designer outfits and expensive jewelry glinting under the lights. But as the heavy double doors at the entrance swung open, a hush swept over the room. Heads turned, and whispers began to ripple among the crowd. Ethan Blake stepped into the ballroom with the kind of confidence that comes from years of climbing back after being torn down. But it wasn't just him that captured everyone's attention. On his arm was a woman no one had seen before, a woman whose presence seemed at odds with the opulence around her. Dressed in a flowing, midnight blue gown that accentuated her delicate frame, Lily Carter radiated an elegance that seemed to defy the struggles life had thrown at her. Her gaze was steady, though a hint of uncertainty flickered in her eyes as she scanned the crowd. Near the front of the room, Sophia Bennett, the bride and Ethan's ex-fiancée, froze in the middle of a conversation. The glass of champagne in her hand trembled slightly as she took in the sight of Ethan and his mysterious date. Her groom, Gale, noticed her reaction and followed her gaze, his smile faltering. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew the history between these three. Ethan's fall from grace after Sophia left him for Gale was the talk of the city for months. And now, here he was, making a statement that no one could ignore. But this wasn't just about appearances. There was something deeper simmering beneath the surface, a motive hidden in plain sight. As they walked further into the room, the whispers grew louder. "Who is she?" someone murmured. "She doesn't seem like the type Ethan would date," another voice added, laced with skepticism. But it was Sophia who couldn't contain herself. Setting down her glass, she strode toward them, her smile tight and her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and curiosity. "Ethan," she said, her voice laced with thinly veiled contempt. "I see you've brought a guest." Ethan's smile was polite but cold, the kind that could slice through steel. "Sophia," he greeted, barely acknowledging Gale standing beside her. "Yes, this is Lily. I figured it was time for you to meet someone truly genuine for a change." Sophia's gaze shifted to Lily, taking in every detail, the way she carried herself, the subtle nervousness behind her calm demeanor, the fact that she was clearly out of place among the high society. "She looks lovely," Sophia said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Wherever did you find her?" Before Ethan could respond, Lily, sensing the unspoken insult, met Sophia's gaze directly. "I suppose in the same place where people lose their decency," she replied softly but firmly, earning a few surprised looks from those nearby. The bite in her words was subtle but undeniable, and it was enough to momentarily throw Sophia off balance. Ethan tightened his grip on Lily's arm, not out of possession, but solidarity. In that moment, he realized this night was no longer just about petty revenge. It was about something far more important: dignity, respect, and the power of standing by someone who deserved better than what life had given her. The tension was almost unbearable as the confrontation drew stares from every corner of the room. Gale, trying to defuse the situation, forced a laugh. "Well, this is a wedding, isn't it? We're all here to celebrate and put the past behind us." "Indeed," Ethan replied, his eyes locking with Sophia's. "Let's celebrate new beginnings." But Sophia wasn't done. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice so only Ethan could hear. "You think you can waltz in here and humiliate me with this stunt?" Her smile turned icy. "You're still the same pathetic fool I left behind." Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could react, the soft touch of Lily's hand on his arm brought him back from the brink. She looked at him, her expression clear and composed, silently telling him that he didn't need to stoop to Sophia's level. The moment passed, and Ethan let out a slow breath, regaining control. "Let's go find our table," Ethan said to Lily, leading her away from Sophia and Gail. The crowd parted as they moved through the room, whispers trailing behind them. But as they did, a thought lingered in Ethan's mind. Tonight was supposed to be about getting even, about showing the world that he had risen above it all. But now, as he glanced at Lily walking beside him with quiet dignity, he wondered if he had already found something far more valuable than revenge. As they took their seats, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's confrontation was only the beginning. The stakes were rising, and whatever happened next, he knew there was no turning back. The soft clinking of glasses and hushed conversations filled the ballroom, but Ethan's mind was elsewhere. As he sat beside Lily, flashes of the past began to surface, reminding him why he was here in the first place. 2 years earlier, Ethan's life had looked completely different. Back then, he was on the brink of sealing the biggest deal of his career, one that would have catapulted his business into the ranks of New York's elite firms. The night of the deal's announcement, he had been accompanied by Sophia, the woman he was madly in love with, and Gail, his best friend and business partner. Ethan had been certain of his future. He'd built his company from the ground up, rising from poverty with nothing but grit and determination. Sophia had been by his side through it all, supporting his every ambition, or so he thought. They were the perfect couple on the surface, young, successful, and envied by everyone who saw them. He was planning to propose, already imagining their perfect life together. But life unraveled in a single night. Ethan had walked into his office late one evening, excited to share his final plans for the proposal with Gail. The office lights were dim, and he assumed his friend had already left. But the sound of hushed voices down the hall caught his attention. Curious, he followed the voices and froze in the doorway of the conference room. There, under the faint glow of a desk lamp, were Sophia and Gail, locked in a passionate kiss. For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. His world shattered in that instant, the betrayal cutting deeper than he could have imagined. Everything he trusted, his love, his friendship, his future, crumbled before his eyes. The scene seared itself into his memory, a scar that never quite healed. Sophia had been cold and unapologetic when Ethan confronted her. She claimed she had outgrown him, that she needed someone with more ambition than he had. Gail, who was supposed to be his most loyal friend, turned out to be the one secretly undermining him, leveraging the business in ways that would benefit himself while Ethan was distracted by his personal life. In the weeks that followed, Ethan lost not just his fiancée, but also most of his business. Gail's schemes had worked, he drained clients and funds away, leaving Ethan's company barely afloat. Publicly humiliated, Ethan's name became synonymous with failure in their social circles. He withdrew from everyone, focusing solely on survival and rebuilding from the ruins. Those dark days had forged him into someone colder, harder. He clawed his way back, driven by the anger and hurt that festered inside. He promised himself that if he ever had the chance, he would make them regret what they did. And now, that opportunity had finally come. But as Ethan sat beside Lily at the wedding, staring across the room at Sophia laughing with Gail, he felt an unsettling realization creeping in. He wasn't the same man who had been obsessed with revenge. The thought gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to soften, not now. Beside him, Lily's soft voice pulled him out of his thoughts. "Are you okay?" she asked, her concern evident. Her gaze was steady, as if she could sense the storm of emotions swirling within him. Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine," he replied, though even he could tell it sounded hollow. The music shifted, and couples began to move to the dance floor. Gail and Sophia were among them, the picture of a perfect couple in their designer outfits. It was all a performance, a facade, and Ethan could see through it all. But instead of feeling satisfaction, there was something else in his chest, a nagging question he wasn't ready to confront. As he watched them glide across the floor, the image of that night flashed before his eyes again, reminding him of how far he had come, and how much he still had to lose. The memory of betrayal still weighed heavily on Ethan, but as the music played on, his thoughts drifted back to the day everything started to change, the day he met Lily and her daughter, Ella. It was a brisk autumn afternoon, and Ethan was on his way to yet another high-stakes meeting. The streets of Manhattan buzzed with the usual rush-hour chaos, people hurrying by with their heads down, oblivious to everything but their own agendas. Ethan had always moved through this city like a ghost, detached from the life teeming around him. But that day, something snapped him out of his routine. A sudden, high-pitched scream cut through the noise. Ethan turned just in time to see a little girl, no older than 6, dart into the street chasing after a doll that had slipped from her grasp. Time seemed to slow as she ran toward oncoming traffic, oblivious to the danger. Without thinking, Ethan sprinted forward. He reached the girl in the nick of time, grabbing her around the waist and pulling her back onto the sidewalk just as a taxi screeched to a halt inches from where she had been standing. For a moment, everything was still. The little girl looked up at Ethan, wide-eyed and trembling, clutching her doll as tears streamed down her face. "You saved me," she sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck. Ethan knelt there, holding her as she cried, feeling something in his chest loosen, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Before he could react, a disheveled woman came running toward them, panic etched on her face. "Ella," she cried, dropping to her knees beside them. She hugged the girl tightly, her breath ragged as she whispered, "Thank God you're okay." Ethan stood back, awkwardly brushing dust off his coat as he watched the reunion. The woman finally looked up at him, her eyes brimming with gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice shaking. I don't know what I would have done if." "It's all right," Ethan interrupted, trying to wave off the attention. "Just make sure she's careful next time." But the woman wasn't done. "Please, let me repay you somehow," she insisted, standing up and clutching her daughter's hand. "I don't have much, but I can't just—" "Really, it's fine," Ethan said, already turning to leave. He was used to helping others through donations and charity events, but this kind of personal interaction was different, uncomfortable. Yet something in the woman's eyes, a mix of desperation and determination, made him pause. "Please," she repeated, more urgently this time. "You saved her life. I can't just walk away without doing something in return." Ethan sighed, glancing at his watch. The last thing he needed was more complications. But then, an idea struck him, an impulsive, almost reckless thought. He looked back at the woman and her daughter, both of them still staring at him expectantly. "All right," he said slowly. "If you're so insistent, there's something you can do." Her eyes lit up with hope. "Anything." "There's a wedding tonight," he began, watching her expression carefully. "It's complicated, but I need someone to go with me." The woman blinked in confusion. "A wedding?" "Yes. My ex-fiancée's, to be exact." The words tasted bitter on his tongue. "I'll be honest, I want to make a point by showing up with someone unexpected. You'd be doing me a favor." The woman hesitated, clearly taken aback by the odd request. "I'm not sure I'd fit in at something like that," she admitted, her voice faltering. Ethan's eyes softened. "Look, it's just one night. I'll take care of everything, clothes, hair, whatever you need. Just trust me." She looked down at her daughter, who was staring up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. "Can we, Mama?" Ella asked. "It sounds fun." The woman's resolve seemed to crumble at her daughter's innocent plea. After a long pause, she nodded. "Okay. My name's Lily, by the way. Lily Carter." "Ethan Blake," he replied, extending his hand. "It's nice to meet you, Lily." As they shook hands, a strange sense of calm washed over Ethan. He hadn't planned on getting involved with anyone like this, but maybe, just maybe, there was more to this arrangement than a simple favor. "Be ready by 6 p.m. I'll send someone to pick you up," he said, already planning the transformation that would take place that evening. As he walked away, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that fate had played a hand in this unlikely encounter. He wasn't sure what the night would hold, but for the first time in years, he was genuinely curious. As the sun dipped behind the New York skyline, the buzz of anticipation hung in the air. Ethan paced back and forth in his penthouse, glancing at his watch every few minutes. The car he had sent to pick up Lily and her daughter would be arriving soon, and he couldn't shake the uneasy mix of curiosity and doubt swirling in his mind. Was this really a good idea? He hadn't seen Lily since their encounter on the street earlier that day, and despite his offer, he couldn't help but wonder if she would back out at the last minute. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime, the intercom signaling the arrival of his guests. Ethan took a deep breath and steeled himself before heading down to greet them. When the elevator doors slid open, Ethan was met with a sight that made him pause. Lily stood there, her transformation nothing short of remarkable. The flowing midnight blue gown he had tailored for her fit perfectly, accentuating her natural grace. Her hair, once wild and untamed, now cascaded in soft curls down her back. The makeup was subtle yet elegant, enhancing the warm glow in her eyes. But what struck Ethan the most wasn't the outward change, it was the quiet confidence in her posture, as though she had reclaimed a piece of herself that had been buried beneath layers of hardship. Beside her, Ella twirled in a simple but adorable dress, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Mr. Ethan! Mama looks like a princess," the little girl exclaimed, beaming with pride. Ethan managed a smile. "She certainly does," he agreed, his gaze lingering on Lily a moment longer than he intended. Lily gave him a tentative smile, still adjusting to the strangeness of it all. "I have to admit, this feels surreal," she said, her voice laced with nervous laughter. "I'm not used to, well, any of this." Ethan's expression softened. "You don't need to worry about fitting in tonight. Just be yourself. Trust me, that'll be more than enough." They rode in silence as the car wound its way through the city streets. As they neared the venue, Ethan felt his chest tighten. He hadn't been back to this place since his engagement to Sophia, and the memories of that night clawed at the edges of his mind. But a glance at Lily, sitting composed and focused, steadied him. This was no longer just about settling scores, it was about showing that people could rise above the labels society slapped on them. The car pulled up to the Grand Hotel, where cameras flashed and guests in designer outfits stepped out of sleek vehicles. The spectacle was a display of wealth and status, but Ethan couldn't help but feel that all of it paled in comparison to the strength and resilience embodied by the woman beside him. As they entered the ballroom, all eyes immediately turned to them. The murmurs began almost instantly, a ripple of disbelief spreading through the crowd. Ethan remained unfazed, his hand resting lightly on Lily's arm as they made their way inside. He could feel the stares, the judgment in the air, but it no longer bothered him as it once would have. He wasn't there to please these people. For Lily, the experience was a whirlwind of emotions. The opulence of the event was overwhelming, the chandeliers glittering like stars, the scent of roses heavy in the air, and the sea of expensive gowns and tailored suits. But amidst all of it, she found herself drawing strength from the little hand gripping hers. Ella looked up at her mother with wide-eyed admiration, and it was that look that kept Lily grounded. She had come a long way, and tonight was about more than just playing a role, it was about reclaiming her dignity and proving to herself that she belonged, even in a world so different from her own. As they mingled through the crowd, the whispers grew louder. Sophia, who had been mingling near the bar, caught sight of them and her expression darkened. Her eyes narrowed as she took in Lily's appearance, searching for any crack in the polished facade. "So, you really went all out for this, didn't you, Ethan?" Sophia's voice dripped with sarcasm as she approached them, her smile cold and calculating. "I must say, I'm impressed with the costume." Before Ethan could respond, Lily held up a hand. "It's not a costume," she said calmly, meeting Sophia's gaze without flinching. "It's just me. And I wouldn't trade that for anything." The firmness in her voice caught Sophia off guard, and a brief flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual smirk. "We'll see how long that confidence lasts," she muttered, turning away as if dismissing them entirely. Ethan felt a surge of pride as he looked at Lily. She had faced down the venom of someone who had once torn him apart, and she did it with grace. But as the evening progressed, he couldn't shake the sense that this was only the calm before the storm. Something told him that Sophia wasn't done, and that the night's biggest test was yet to come. The night wore on, filled with the clinking of glasses, muted laughter, and the superficial pleasantries of the city's elite. Ethan kept a steady eye on Sophia and Gail as they moved from group to group, playing the perfect hosts. But he knew Sophia well enough to see through the smile she wore. There was something brewing behind those eyes. She wasn't one to let things slide, especially not when it threatened the image she'd so carefully curated. The tension was thick in the air, a storm building that was only waiting for the right moment to strike. Meanwhile, Lily had settled into the evening better than Ethan could have hoped. She spoke with a quiet dignity that turned curiosity into admiration among some of the guests. Even those who initially eyed her with disdain began to warm up to her after just a few minutes of conversation. It was clear she wasn't just a pretty face in a designer gown. There was substance, a story of struggle and perseverance that even the most judgmental onlookers couldn't ignore. But Sophia wasn't interested in being impressed. She was focused on finding a way to cut Lily down, and when she spotted an opportunity, she seized it. It happened just as the formalities of the evening gave way to dancing. The band had struck up a slow tune, and couples were gliding across the floor. Ethan and Lily were on the sidelines, watching Ella twirl in her little dress, lost in her own world of make-believe. It was a brief, tender moment of peace in the midst of the high society spectacle. But then, Sophia appeared, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Ethan, darling, it's been too long since we've shared a dance, don't you think?" Ethan's eyes narrowed, sensing the trap. "I think I'll pass," he said flatly. Sophia's smile didn't waver. She turned her gaze to Lily, who stood quietly beside him. "Well, in that case, I'm sure your lovely date wouldn't mind taking a turn around the floor, would she?" Lily blinked, caught off guard. Before she could respond, Sophia's voice rose just enough to draw attention. "After all, I'm sure everyone here is dying to know more about you, Lily. Tell us, what brings you into such refined company?" The surrounding guests, already intrigued by the unusual pair, began to close in, their interest piqued by Sophia's pointed question. The murmurs grew louder as more people edged closer, eager to hear the conversation unfold. Ethan stiffened, but before he could intervene, Lily stepped forward. She met Sophia's gaze with a calmness that belied the tension in the air. "I'm here because I was invited, just like everyone else," Lily replied simply. Sophia's eyes gleamed with malice. "Invited? Of course, you were. But let's be honest, someone like you doesn't just stumble into a place like this. Surely there's more to the story." Her voice took on a mocking edge. "Or is it that Ethan has a thing for charity cases these days?" The crowd gasped, and the words hung in the air like poison. All eyes were now on Lily, waiting to see how she would react. For a moment, Ethan's heart raced. He could see Lily's knuckles tighten as she clenched her hands at her sides, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. This was the exact moment Sophia had been waiting for, the moment to shatter Lily's confidence in front of everyone. But instead of shrinking back, Lily took a deep breath and straightened her posture. "You're right, Sophia," she said, her voice steady. "I don't belong to this world of glitz and glamour. But that doesn't mean I'm less valuable or deserving of respect." The room fell silent as Lily continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've lived a life most of you couldn't imagine. I've been through hardships, yes. But those struggles have made me resilient, and I'm proud of who I am. You may judge me because I come from a different place, but that doesn't define my worth. In fact, it's the kindness and generosity of people like Ethan that have reminded me of what really matters: integrity, compassion, and the courage to rise above whatever life throws at you." Sophia's smirk faded, replaced by a flash of uncertainty. This wasn't going as she had planned. She had expected Lily to crumble under the weight of her insults, but instead, Lily's words were cutting through the room, resonating with those who had written her off moments before. Ethan felt a surge of pride swell in his chest. Lily had done what he himself hadn't been able to do for years, stand up to Sophia with poise and grace, and in doing so, reveal the pettiness of her character for all to see. But Sophia wasn't finished. Her voice took on a sharper edge as she turned back to the crowd. You think that's impressive? Let me tell you the real story. She paused for dramatic effect. This woman isn't just some guest. She was homeless, living on the streets until Ethan decided to play the hero. She's not fit to be here, rubbing elbows with people who actually earned their place. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Lily's face turned pale. The humiliation she had fought so hard to overcome now lay bare before everyone. Sophia's words stung with cruelty, designed to strip Lily of the dignity she had fought to reclaim. For a moment, Ethan felt rage boil inside him, threatening to spill over. But as he looked at Lily, standing there with her head held high despite the cruel attack, he realized that this was the test he had been waiting for, not for Lily, but for himself. He could strike back, tearing Sophia down in the way she had torn him apart years ago. But was that truly who he wanted to be? Before he could react, Lily took a step forward. Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve was unshaken. I was homeless, she admitted, her gaze sweeping the room. I lost everything. But what I never lost was my will to fight, to keep going for the sake of my daughter. And if that makes me unworthy in your eyes, then so be it. A hush fell over the room as people processed what she had just said. The raw honesty in her voice carried more weight than any of the insults thrown her way. In that moment, Lily wasn't just a woman in a fancy dress, she was a symbol of resilience, of what it meant to rise from the ashes, no matter how many times life tried to knock you down. Ethan stepped forward, taking Lily's hand in his. Lily is more deserving of respect than anyone in this room, he said, his voice cold and clear. She's taught me more about strength and courage in a few days than I've learned in a lifetime of dealing with people like you, Sophia. The words hung in the air, leaving Sophia seething but unable to respond. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, began to murmur approvingly. People who had initially looked at Lily with suspicion now saw her in a different light. The facade of wealth and status that Sophia had built her life around began to crack, revealing the insecurity beneath. As Ethan and Lily walked away, hand in hand, the night took on a new meaning. The test was far from over, but they had just taken the first step in facing it together. The ballroom's lights blurred as Lily's mind drifted to the memories she usually kept buried deep within. Sophia's cruel words had cut through her, and while she had stood tall in that moment, the sting of her past refused to loosen its grip. The flash of cameras and whispers faded as the painful chapters of her life played out in her mind. It wasn't long ago that Lily had a life she could be proud of. She had been an ambitious small business owner in Brooklyn, running a modest but thriving cafe. The cafe had been her dream, a space where people from all walks of life could gather, share stories, and find a sense of belonging. She had poured her heart into it, working long hours, fueled by the hope of providing a better future for her daughter, Ella. But all it took was a series of unfortunate events for her world to come crashing down. It started with the betrayal of someone she trusted, a business partner who quietly siphoned funds and left her with insurmountable debts. The financial blow was followed by legal battles, and soon, Lily was forced to close her beloved cafe. The losses mounted, and her savings dwindled. With no safety net, it wasn't long before the bills piled up and she lost her apartment. In the space of a few months, everything Lily had worked for was stripped away. She found herself on the streets with Ella, doing whatever it took to survive. Nights were cold and unforgiving, spent huddled in shelters or under bridges, with only her daughter's hand to hold onto for comfort. Lily learned quickly how invisible you become when you have nothing, how people look away, as if poverty is contagious. Yet, through it all, she refused to give up. Her love for Ella kept her going, even on the days when she felt like giving in to despair. She held on to the belief that someday, somehow, she would claw her way out of the darkness. But the world wasn't kind to people in her position. Opportunities were scarce, and the few jobs she could find barely kept them fed. Life had become a constant struggle, but despite the hardships, Lily never let Ella see her lose hope. Then came the day Ethan saved Ella's life. For Lily, it felt like a glimmer of light breaking through the endless night. When she saw how effortlessly he extended kindness to a stranger, without expecting anything in return, it reignited a spark in her that she thought had been extinguished. She felt compelled to repay him, even though she had nothing to offer. Little did she know that this chance encounter would lead her to this night, standing in front of people who judged her without knowing a thing about her. As Lily returned to the present, her gaze shifted to where Ethan stood beside her. She wondered if he truly understood the weight of what she had endured, and what it meant for her to be standing here in this opulent ballroom, daring to reclaim her dignity. Sophia's words had been cruel, but Lily had faced far worse. Tonight, she had chosen to be more than just the labels people attached to her. She was determined to prove, if only to herself, that she could rise above her past, and perhaps build a future where she wasn't defined by where she came from, but by who she had chosen to become. As she locked eyes with Ethan, she saw the flicker of something new, a recognition, not of pity, but of respect. Whatever challenges the rest of the night held, she knew she wasn't facing them alone. The hum of conversations gradually filled the room again, but a subtle shift had occurred. The guests who had initially judged Lily now saw her in a different light. Ethan sensed this change, but the night was far from over. He could feel the weight of expectant eyes following him as he moved through the crowd with Lily by his side. And then, just as he feared, the man he had been hoping to impress all evening stepped forward. Peter Zhang, a renowned investor with deep connections in the global real estate market, had been observing from the shadows. His sharp eyes missed nothing, and he was known for valuing both business acumen and character in equal measure. The deal Ethan had been working toward, one that would secure the expansion of his sustainable architecture projects, hinged on tonight's impression. "Ethan," Peter greeted, extending a hand. His tone was measured, giving nothing away. "It's good to finally meet in person. I've heard a lot about your work." "Likewise," Ethan replied, masking the tension he felt beneath a practiced smile. "I've been looking forward to this conversation." Peter's gaze flickered briefly to Lily before returning to Ethan. "I see you've brought someone interesting to the event." "Quite the statement," he remarked, the words heavy with implications. Lily straightened beside Ethan, sensing that this was no casual conversation. Peter was clearly testing Ethan's choices, how he would react under pressure, whether he would stand by the person he brought into this world, or distance himself to protect his image. Ethan felt the pressure building. For a fleeting moment, he considered how easy it would be to deflect, to brush off the situation and play it safe. After all, he had been fighting for years to rebuild his business from the ground up. Securing this deal could change everything for his company, and even more importantly, it would allow him to invest back into the community projects that had become his focus. But then he thought about what that would cost, compromising his integrity, and worse, betraying someone who had trusted him with her vulnerability. "She's more than just a statement," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Lily is someone who has taught me about resilience and strength in ways I couldn't have imagined. We come from different worlds, but I'm proud to have her here with me tonight." Peter's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. He leaned in slightly, as if testing how far Ethan was willing to go. "Resilience is admirable, but in our line of work, it's not just about surviving. It's about navigating complex relationships and protecting your reputation. Are you sure this partnership aligns with what you want to achieve?" Lily's grip tightened on her clutch. She could feel the unspoken challenge in Peter's words. He wasn't just questioning Ethan's judgment, he was questioning her worth. Her chest tightened, but she refused to let fear take hold. Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm sure," he answered firmly. "Because I'm not just focused on the bottom line. I'm interested in building something meaningful, something that's about more than just profit margins. If that means surrounding myself with people who've overcome real challenges, who understand what it means to fight for something better, then that's exactly the kind of alignment I'm looking for." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, Peter's lips curved into a faint smile, a rare expression for a man known for his serious demeanor. "I respect that," he said simply. "It's not often I see someone willing to risk something in this business for the right reasons." The tension in Ethan's shoulders eased slightly, but he knew this was just the beginning. Peter was still evaluating, still weighing whether Ethan's values aligned with his own business interests. But for now, it seemed that Ethan had passed the first test. Lily exhaled slowly, a rush of relief flooding through her. She couldn't help but glance at Ethan, a silent question in her eyes. Why had he taken that risk? Ethan caught her gaze and gave her a small nod, as if to say, "I told you, you're worth it." Peter's gaze shifted between the two of them, his expression now tinged with curiosity rather than skepticism. "I think we'll have much to discuss later tonight," he said, before excusing himself back into the crowd. As Peter walked away, Ethan felt the knot of anxiety in his chest loosen. He hadn't just made a business decision, he had made a choice about the kind of man he wanted to be moving forward. And in that moment, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them with conviction. But deep down, he also sensed that Sophia wasn't done yet. The night's biggest challenge was still to come. The tension in the room lingered, a quiet hum beneath the surface of the evening's glamour. As the music swelled and laughter rippled across the ballroom, Ethan's focus never strayed far from Sophia, who had retreated to a group of her closest friends. He could see her seething, the forced smiles and laughter barely concealing the simmering fury beneath. Sophia wasn't used to losing, especially not in front of an audience. And Ethan knew she was plotting something. Lily, however, remained the picture of composure. She had weathered the night's insults with dignity, her chin held high despite the whispers and stares that followed her. But Ethan could see the strain behind her calm demeanor, the subtle way her fingers tightened around her glass, the way she occasionally glanced down, lost in thought. She had fought so hard to stand tall, but the night's events had taken their toll. As the evening wore on, the lights dimmed, and the master of ceremonies announced that it was time for the newlyweds' first dance. All eyes turned to the center of the ballroom, where Gail and Sophia took the floor. They looked every bit the perfect couple, radiant, poised, the epitome of high society elegance. But Ethan saw through the facade. The tension between them was unmistakable, a barely concealed strain as they moved stiffly in time with the music. As the dance ended, Sophia broke away from Gail, a determined gleam in her eyes. She made her way to the stage, taking hold of the microphone. The room fell silent, and Ethan's heart sank as he realized that this was it, Sophia's final move. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Sophia began, her voice smooth and saccharine. "It means the world to Gail and me that you've joined us to celebrate our special day. But before we continue with the festivities, I feel there's something I need to say, something that's been weighing on me all evening." Ethan's muscles tensed, his instinct screaming at him that nothing good was about to come from this. He glanced at Lily, who met his gaze with concern in her eyes. She, too, knew that Sophia was about to strike. Sophia's smile was razor-sharp as she looked directly at Lily. "You know, when you invite people into your life, you hope they're bringing something of value, something meaningful to the table. But sometimes, people show up with nothing but empty hands and empty promises, hoping to ride the coattails of those who've actually earned their place." The crowd's whispers grew louder, all eyes darting between Sophia and Lily. The air was thick with anticipation, and Ethan could feel the ground shifting beneath him. Sophia was out for blood. "Take our unexpected guest tonight, for example," Sophia continued, her voice dripping with malice. "A woman who claims to have overcome challenges, but who really just relies on the pity of others to pull her out of the gutter. It's easy to dress someone up and pretend they belong, but deep down, we all know the truth. Some people will always be out of place, no matter how hard they try." The silence was deafening. Lily's face drained of color, her composure cracking for the first time. The words stung, each one a barb aimed at tearing away the fragile confidence she had built up. Ethan felt the anger rise in his chest like a fire, threatening to consume him. But before he could move, Lily took a step forward, her expression hardening. "No," Lily said, her voice quiet but resolute. "You're wrong." The room held its breath as she continued. "I may not come from your world, Sophia, but that doesn't mean I don't belong here. I belong wherever I choose to be, because I know my worth. You think money and status define value, but I've learned that real value comes from the strength to stand tall, even when everything is against you. I don't need your approval to know who I am. Sophia's smile wavered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she considered beneath her. But before she could retort, Ethan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Sophia, that's enough, Ethan said, his tone cold and commanding. You've spent your whole life building up walls around yourself, walls of privilege, arrogance, and fear. But walls don't protect you from the truth. They just keep you trapped inside your own insecurities. The crowd murmured in agreement, the tide slowly turning. People began to see Sophia for what she truly was, a woman desperate to maintain control, clinging to the remnants of a life built on superficiality. Gale, sensing the shift in the room's energy, looked visibly uncomfortable, his confidence faltering. This night was supposed to be about celebrating love and new beginnings, Ethan continued, his gaze never leaving Sophia. But all you've done is show everyone what happens when you let bitterness and spite rule your life. Lily doesn't need your validation. She has more courage and integrity in her little finger than you've ever shown in all your years of climbing the social ladder. The crowd erupted in murmurs, nods of agreement rippling through the room. Sophia stood frozen, her carefully constructed image unraveling before her eyes. Without waiting for a response, Ethan took Lily's hand and turned toward the exit. Come on, Lily, he said softly. We're done here. As they walked out of the ballroom, the whispers and judgment no longer mattered. They had faced the worst and emerged stronger, hand in hand, ready to leave the past behind and embrace whatever came next. The cool night air was a welcome relief as they stepped out of the opulent hotel and onto the quiet street. The noise of the party and the judgmental whispers faded behind them, leaving only the soft hum of the city. Ethan walked beside Lily in silence, their footsteps in sync as they put distance between themselves and the chaos they'd just escaped. Neither spoke for a long time, both lost in their own thoughts. For Lily, it was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short span of time. Just hours ago, she had been nervously preparing for a night that seemed impossible, dressing in a gown she could never afford, walking into a world that had always been closed off to her. Now, as the night drew to a close, she felt a deep sense of relief, as though she had shed the last vestiges of the shame and insecurity that had clung to her for so long. Ethan slowed his pace, turning to face Lily as they stopped under the soft glow of a street lamp. I'm sorry for putting you through all of that tonight, he said, his voice sincere. I didn't know how far Sophia would go, and I should have prepared you better. Lily shook her head. You don't need to apologize, she replied softly. If anything, I'm grateful. Tonight reminded me that I'm not defined by my past, or by people like her. I'm stronger than I realized. Ethan looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a woman he brought along to make a point, but as someone who had faced life's harshest trials and come out the other side with her dignity intact. There was a strength in her that he deeply admired, a strength that had nothing to do with wealth or status. It was the kind of resilience that couldn't be bought or faked. You know, Ethan began, choosing his words carefully, when I asked you to come with me tonight, it wasn't just about proving something to Sophia. I think I was also trying to prove something to myself, that I'm not the same person I was when she left me. But I realized tonight that the real victory isn't about showing her or anyone else that I've moved on. It's about finding people in my life who actually matter. Lily felt warmth spread through her chest. And what have you found? She asked gently. Ethan took a deep breath. I've found that sometimes, the most valuable people in your life are the ones you least expect. I didn't realize it at first, but you've helped me see things differently, what really matters. A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued walking. The world around them seemed to slow, and for once, Ethan wasn't thinking about revenge, business deals, or what others thought of him. Instead, his thoughts centered on the simple peace that came from being with someone who saw him for who he truly was. As they turned a corner, they found themselves in front of a small cafe, its lights glowing warmly in the dark. The sign above the door read under new management, and through the windows, they could see people inside, smiling, laughing, sharing moments that felt real and genuine. It was the kind of place that reminded Ethan of what he'd been missing in his life, a sense of community, of connection. Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with quiet determination. "I think it's time I stop hiding behind what I've lost," she said. "It's time to start rebuilding." Ethan smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. "I think you already have." As they stood there, on the threshold of a new beginning, both of them knew that this was more than just the end of a difficult night. It was the start of something unexpected and beautiful, something built on trust, mutual respect, and the belief that the past doesn't have to define the future.